Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies. And today I want to tell you about The Nightingale, which is currently available on Hulu. Not only is it one of the best films of 2019, it's also one of the most horrifying. So The Nightingale is an indie film from Australia that is horrible in the sense that it depicts a lot of horrible stuff. Now, this is a very good movie. I'm not saying the movie is horrible, yet this is not one that all of you are going to be able to watch because you're not going to be able to stomach it. The Nightingale is written and directed by Jennifer Kent, who is most famous for The Babadook. This is her follow-up to it, and this is not a horror movie. And as you may remember, The Babadook was a horror movie that was really stylish, and really the whole movie was a metaphor for trauma. Now, The Nightingale is also very much about trauma, yet it depicts the trauma that it's about. So this is a more true-to-life story of traumatic experiences and sort of how we carry them and deal with them. Less of a metaphor, yet also less on the nose than The Babadook, in my opinion. There's a lot more subtlety going on in The Nightingale that I thought was really great, and I'll get to that in a minute. Now, I'm going to be very light on spoilers, but there's a word that's used far too often, at least in America it's used too often, and that's trigger warning. For the most part, trigger warnings are BS. The one major exception would be sexual assault. I happen to feel like if there's graphic depictions of rape in a movie, it's good to warn a mass audience like this because victims of sexual assault do not necessarily want to see that depicted in a film. The Nightingale depicts rape graphically more than once. Again, I'm not going to really spoil because I don't want you to necessarily predict what's happening, but if you're not going to be able to handle that, do not watch this movie. Now, going into The Nightingale, I had heard that it was one of the most brutal movies ever made, that it was just too intense and very difficult to watch, so I was braced for impact. And while it is brutal and it is very graphic and it is traumatizing, I watch a lot of movies and I have seen much worse. Not in many movies, but movies like Martyrs, a Serbian film, and just speaking of depictions of rape, Gaspar Noé's Irreversible, even though it only depicts one, to me, it was way more intense than what you actually see in The Nightingale. That said, it's still pretty intense in this movie and very, very upsetting. Multiple things happen in this movie early on that are upsetting, and it's all the catalyst for what eventually becomes a revenge film. Now, I'm a big fan of revenge movies. It's one of my favorite subgenres, and The Nightingale, while not entertaining, like a lot of them can be, movies like Kill Bill, things like that, it dealt with it in a way that's very different from what I'm used to, and I thought it was actually pretty brilliant. So a little bit of backstory and historical context that is not explained in the movie that would be good for you to know going into it, or at least to know afterwards if you've already seen the movie. This takes place in Tasmania, which is that somewhat little island off the southern coast of Australia. It's roughly the size of South Carolina, and it takes place in 1825, which was the peak of the Black War. Now, for more context, a lot of what you see in the movie is English colonists, more specifically soldiers, that are at war with the native aboriginals. And the Black War was mainly guerrilla style, so just in the woods, attacks. A few hundred English died and maybe triple that amount of aboriginals died over the course of about 10 years, but as a result, the landscape was very, very dangerous, and that plays into the movie pretty big, and I'll get to that in a minute as well. But for a little bit more historical context, all of Australia was basically colonized with prisoners. Maybe you've heard that before. And my understanding is that this was largely done following the events of the Revolutionary War as a way to control the population a bit more, so they would take prisoners from Europe, put them to work as colonists, and they were able to work off their years and then were able to sort of live there afterwards. And the main character in this movie is such a prisoner. She's Irish, and they don't go into, I think she's a thief, they don't go into too many details, but she's essentially an indentured servant. For a better descriptor. And because there was no overarching system, and this is just sort of an outpost run by not very good people, there's nobody checking in. There's not much there's papers to speak of, but there's not much in the way of paperwork. There's obviously no computer systems. Nobody's keeping track of these prisoners, and so it's very difficult for them to get out of the situations that they're in, even when they have worked off their time. So there's a setup that sort of plays into it. You don't have to know that stuff to enjoy this movie, but it does sort of help to sort of understand the power dynamic that exists in the onset. And so the main character, Claire, is out for revenge, hunting down a small group of soldiers headed north, and she needs to enlist the help of an Aboriginal scout to help her get across this really rough terrain, and also to make sure that she's not killed by the other Aboriginals, which that's one of the things that was so interesting about this movie. Is the scout is basically going to be killed by any white soldiers that see him, and she is likely to be killed by any of the Aboriginals that might see her, at least if they're not together. So that added a really interesting dynamic to this as well. Narratively, it could have been tighter, but again, it's a nitpick. I think this is a really great movie. It is one of those movies you're probably only going to want to watch once. One more note on the lead antagonist. I'm not going to say who it is because that would spoil anything, but pay attention to the decisions that they're making throughout, because I found that a lot of the horrors that they inflict on other people throughout the movie are in reaction to things that are their fault to begin with. Again, without being too specific, they keep making decisions that are causing things to happen that are then causing them to commit horrendous acts, just horrible, horrible acts on other people. And it all traces back to smaller immoralities that they inflict on other people as well, and smaller immoral decisions that then just sort of lead into these major, major moments. I thought that was really brilliant. And again, there's a lot of subtle things in this movie that I thought were really, really brilliant. And on that note, the morality of the Nightingale is all different shades of gray. Now, there is black and white. Clearly, there's acts that occur in this that are the most evil thing that you could do to another person. But there's also little decisions that all the characters are making, even the more righteous characters in the movie. There are decisions that they're making that are morally gray and all the full spectrum. And if you're not really paying attention, you can miss a lot of it, but there's a lot more meat on the bone than you would expect there. And my recommendation is dive into this one and mentally sort of explore it as much as you want to, because there is a lot there. Yet the main narrative, the main story is fulfilling enough that you don't really have to dig in and analyze everyone's choices. Yet the writing in this movie is pretty brilliant, again, except for the fact that I felt like it could have been wound a little bit tighter. So there it is, Nightingale, I think will hold up as one of the best movies of 2019. It's currently available on Hulu. If you like this review, give me a like, leave me a comment, let me know if you've seen it, if you want to see it. Be sure to thank the Patreon supporters. They're keeping the lights on. Literally, if you'd like to become a Patreon supporter, there's a link to the description. There's also a link in the description to the music that you hear on the channel. It's a Spotify playlist. It's free to listen to. I get a lot of questions as to what songs are playing, and they're always different, and there's multiple per video. So check out that playlist if you're into the tunes I've been playing. But I will keep making videos like this as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking this one out, and you will see me on the next one.